My name is Eleanor Wells. I'm 71 years old, and at a dinner celebrating her success, my own daughter toasted to me leaving her life for good. So I did, and I took her entire financial empire with me. It's a long story, one that took a lifetime to build and only a single night to detonate. I have a feeling some of you out there might understand parts of it, maybe even all of it. It's a little past 9 p.m. here on the East Coast. The house is quiet, except for the distant sigh of the ocean, and I'm finally ready to tell it. I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Maybe we can keep each other company for a little while tonight. The evening that changed everything began, as so many important evenings do, with a bottle of wine. But this was not just any wine. It was a 1978 Domaine de la Romanée Conti Burgundy, a bottle that had been sleeping in the cool, silent darkness of my cellar for over 40 years, waiting for a moment that, it turned out, would never truly arrive. I ran a soft, clean cloth over the dusty glass, my thumb tracing the elegant, faded script of the label. The memory associated with it was so vivid, so potent, it felt like I could reach out and touch it. I remember the day James, my late husband, brought it home. It was Victoria's 18th birthday, a bright, crisp day in late autumn. His eyes, the color of warm whiskey and just as intoxicating, had been twinkling with a father's boundless pride and hope. "We'll open this, Ellie," he'd said, his voice a low, happy rumble that always made me feel safe. "We'll save it for the day our girl achieves something truly undeniably great, something all by herself, a monument to her own strength, her own grit." It was meant to be a prize at the end of a long, hard-won race, a liquid testament to his unwavering faith in our daughter's potential. But as I carefully placed the bottle into a padded carrier, the dream felt as dusty and fragile as the bottle itself. The day James had so hopefully envisioned had never materialized. Tonight's celebration wasn't for something Victoria had built with her own two hands, brick by painful brick. It was for a company acquisition, a slick, impressive business deal, financed entirely by a ghost, the ghost of my husband's lifetime of hard work, a fortune managed silently, invisibly, by me. The wine wasn't a celebration of her achievement. It was a memorial to a promise that had been forgotten by everyone but me. Before I left the house, I made a call I often made before facing my daughter. I called my oldest friend, Sophia. Her voice, always pragmatic and warm, was a small, necessary anchor in the churning sea of my emotions. "Are you really going, Eleanor?" she asked, the concern in her tone as clear as a bell. "After she didn't even bother to call you on your birthday last month? A text message, Ellie, that's all she managed." "She's my daughter, Soph," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a phrase I had used as a shield for years, but it was growing thinner with each blow. I have to keep hoping. What else is there? There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. "Hope is a beautiful thing, Ellie, but it needs fertile ground to grow. You've been trying to plant a garden in a desert for a decade. Remember my cousin David, the one whose son kept bleeding him dry for his endless startups? David finally had to change his number and sell his house to escape. It nearly broke his heart, but he told me something I've never forgotten. Sometimes the only way to save someone from drowning is to stop letting them use your head to stay above water." Her words, stark and true, hung in the air long after we said our goodbyes. They followed me into the car, a silent passenger on the drive downtown to the restaurant Victoria had chosen. It was one of those aggressively modern places that mistakes coldness for class, a cavern of glass and polished steel where the lighting was so artfully dim, it felt less like a celebration and more like a corporate deposition. I saw Victoria immediately, holding court at a long table in the center of the room. She wore a sharp, tailored blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe, professional style that brooked no argument. Around her neck was a diamond necklace I recognized instantly because the 5-figure bill for it had arrived in my mailbox just 2 weeks prior. Her husband, Marcus, saw me first.
He gave me a tight, barely there smile and a nod that was more of a dismissal than a welcome. He was a man who had perfected the art of looking pleasant while radiating a chilling disdain. I walked to the table, the precious wine carrier feeling heavier with each step, an offering to a goddess who demanded tribute but offered no blessings in return. Mother, Victoria said, her voice bright and brittle. She didn't stand up, didn't offer a cheek to be kissed. You made it. Of course, darling. Congratulations, I said, my voice softer than I intended. I placed the wine on the table. Your father would have wanted you to have this tonight. She glanced at the label, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Recognition? Nostalgia? No, it was just appraisal, the quick, dismissive assessment of a brand. Oh, old wine, she said, before turning back to a man in a suit seated beside her. Anyway, as I was saying, Charles, the key was leveraging the existing assets to create a more favorable debt-to-equity ratio. I found my seat at the far end of the table, a spot clearly designated for the forgotten matriarch, the silent investor. I felt a familiar knot tightening in my stomach, the one that always appeared before Victoria was about to perform. For my daughter, life was a series of stages, and she was always the star. I just didn't realize that tonight I was the one she had cast in the role of the sacrifice. I sat there, a ghost at the feast, listening to my daughter accept praise for a success she hadn't earned, bankrolled by a love she no longer valued. Sophia's words echoed in my head. A garden in a desert, and I knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty, that a terrible drought was coming. The main course came and went, a blur of exquisitely arranged food that I couldn't taste. I pushed a piece of overpriced sea bass around my plate, the clinking of silverware and the hum of self-important conversation a meaningless buzz in my ears. Victoria was animated, her hands gesturing grandly as she talked about market share, growth projections, and synergy. Marcus hung on her every word, his expression a perfect, practiced blend of adoration and pride. He was her court jester, her most ardent admirer, as long as the queen was signing the checks for her tailored suits and sports car. Then came the toasts. A business partner, a man with a booming voice and a florid face, stood up and lauded Victoria's fearless vision. Another, a sleek woman in her 30s, praised her unshakable nerve in a male-dominated field. With each toast, Victoria's smile grew wider, her posture straighter. She was soaking it all in, the architect of a reality built on my silent, unconditional consent.
Finally, she stood, tapping her champagne glass with a manicured nail. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. "Thank you, everyone," she began, her voice ringing with a performative confidence that I knew, better than anyone, was as hollow as a drum. "This has been a long, hard road, with many sacrifices along the way." She paused, her eyes sweeping the table with theatrical gravity. For a heart-stopping moment, her gaze met mine. In their depths, I saw a flash of something cold and hard, a glint of steel that was not there when she was a little girl who fell asleep in my arms, smelling of sunshine and soap. I've learned that to succeed, you have to be willing to cut away anything that holds you back, any dead weight. Her eyes remained fixed on me, pinning me to my chair. And then came the words, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, that would shatter the final, fragile pane of glass in my heart. "My mother is here tonight," she said, raising her champagne flute. The gesture was meant to look like an honor. It felt like an executioner raising his axe. And she taught me a valuable lesson, the lesson of persistence. A few people chuckled politely, unsure of the tone. She's very persistent, so as I move into this new chapter, I want to thank her. But the best gift I could receive tonight, she paused for dramatic effect, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing on her lips, would be if my mother finally stopped hovering, or better yet, just left my life altogether. Silence, a deep, horrified, echoing silence that sucked all the air out of the room. It was broken by a single, sharp sound. Marcus laughing as he raised his glass in a mock salute. A few other guests, caught between shock and sycophancy, let out awkward, strangled laughs that died in their throats. The heat of 100 pairs of eyes fell on me, burning with pity and morbid curiosity. In that moment, I wasn't a person. I was a punchline, the doddering, overbearing mother who didn't know her place, publicly shamed and dismissed. I did not cry. I did not shout. The pain was too deep, too absolute for that. It was a cold, quiet implosion deep within my chest, a star collapsing into a black hole. I simply, slowly, folded my linen napkin, placed it neatly on the table, and stood up. My movements were unhurried, deliberate. I looked directly at Victoria, whose victorious smile now seemed frozen on her face, a mask of brittle triumph. "If that is what you truly wish, Victoria," I said, my voice miraculously steady, though my entire world was tilting on its axis. I turned my gaze to the rest of the table, a sea of uncomfortable, averted faces. "Please, excuse me." I walked away. I did not run. I walked with the quiet dignity of a woman who had just been handed her freedom, even if it was wrapped in the cruelest kind of paper. The drive home was a blur. The glittering city lights smeared across my windshield like wet paint on a canvas. I parked the car in the garage and walked into the house James and I had built, a house filled with 45 years of memories that now felt like accusing ghosts. But I did not go to the cellar to put away the unopened wine. I did not go to the kitchen for a glass of water. I walked up the stairs to my bedroom, the one that I had shared with James for all those years, and sat on the edge of the bed that still held the faint indentation of his body. And there, in the silent, empty room, the dam finally broke. I wept. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but the quiet, shoulder-shaking tears of a woman who had finally accepted the unacceptable. I cried for the little girl who used to bring me fistfuls of dandelions, calling them sunshine flowers. I cried for the young woman I'd walked down the aisle, her hand trembling in mine. I cried for the mother who had given everything, her time, her money, her heart, and the daughter who had taken it all for granted. I grieved for a relationship that had died long before this night, but whose funeral I was only now attending. How had it come to this? I looked at the old photos on my dresser, Victoria on her first day of school, a gap-toothed smile on her face, Victoria at her college graduation, full of promise, Victoria on her wedding day, smiling next to a younger, more hopeful me. Had I done this? Had my love been a crutch for so long that she'd forgotten how to stand on her own 2 feet? My hand strayed to the small, lacquered box on my nightstand, a box of mementos from James. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a stack of his old treasured letters, was a sealed envelope. On the front, and his familiar, strong, confident handwriting, were the words, "For Eleanor, to be opened only when Victoria forgets who she is." With shaking hands, I broke the seal. The letter inside was short, but every word carried the weight of his love and foresight. "My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, then my worst fear has come to pass. Our daughter, our bright, beautiful girl, has lost her way. I know your heart. It is boundless, forgiving, but love, our love for her, was never meant to be a blank check for a life without gratitude or consequence. It was meant to give her wings, strong enough to soar. But if those wings are only used to fly away from kindness, from family, from the very values we hold dear, then sometimes the greatest act of love is to let her feel the fall. You are the steward of our legacy, Ellie, not just the money, our values. Do what you must, not for revenge,
but for the daughter we raised in the hopes that she may one day find her way back. I trust you, completely and forever. I love you, always. James. The paper felt like a holy relic in my hands. It was not just a letter, it was permission. It was an absolution for the act I now knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had to commit. The tears stopped. The grief receded, replaced by a cold, clear, diamond-hard resolve. James was right. This wasn't about revenge. It was about a lesson. The final, most painful lesson of all. My love had been a safety net for too long. It was time to take it away and see if my daughter had ever, in all her life, learned how to fly. The next morning, the sun rose on a world that felt fundamentally, irrevocably different. The swirling grief of the previous night had crystallized into a hard, clear purpose. I showered, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit, and for the first time in more than 20 years, I didn't check my phone for a missed call or a message from Victoria. There would be none. I knew that with a certainty that was both liberating and heartbreaking. The silence was no longer a void I needed to fill. It was a canvas on which I was about to paint.
My first and only appointment was at 10 a.m. with Mr. Arthur Abernathy. Arthur had been our family lawyer for 30 years, a man of impeccable integrity, a surprisingly dry wit, and a fierce, unwavering loyalty to my late husband. His office was a sanctuary of old leather, polished mahogany, and the comforting, scholarly scent of aging paper and ink. He greeted me at the door himself, foregoing his receptionist, his kind eyes full of a gentle concern that spoke volumes more than words ever could. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft, "Sophia called me this morning. She was very worried. Are you all right?" "I am now, Arthur," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "I'm here on business. Important business." I sat in the plush leather chair across from his vast desk, a chair I had sat in many times over the years, and I did not waste time with pleasantries. I slid the thick, heavy folder I'd retrieved from the hidden safe behind James's portrait across the polished wood. It was a tangible history of a decade's worth of silent, unacknowledged support. Then I placed James's final letter on top of it, like a seal on a royal decree. "I need you to read this first, Arthur," I said. He adjusted his gold-rimmed spectacles and read the letter, his expression unchanging, a lawyer's perfect poker face. When he finished, he folded it carefully, placed it back in its envelope as if it were a fragile artifact, and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "I see," he said softly. He then opened the folder. His skilled, intelligent eyes scanned the trust documents, the loan agreements I'd made Victoria sign for her various failed startups, the title deeds to her home and business, the brokerage statements detailing the flow of capital from my accounts to hers. For 10 long minutes, the only sound in the quiet, sunlit room was the rustle of paper, a sound that seemed to be counting down the final moments of Victoria's old life. Finally, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Well, Eleanor, the James and Eleanor Wells Family Trust is an ironclad document. James was exceptionally adamant about the conditions, especially this one." He tapped a paragraph with his finger. "As the sole surviving trustee, you have full and complete discretionary power. The ingratitude and familial dishonor clause is broad, but given the circumstances you've described and the public nature of the event, it is certainly applicable." He paused, and for the first time I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. This was not the bulldog lawyer James had trusted with his legacy. This was Arthur, the man who attended our daughter's wedding and bounced her on his knee as a child. "However," he continued slowly, choosing his words with the care of a man walking through a minefield, "to invoke this,
It's the nuclear option, Eleanor. Liquidating her business assets, selling the house from under her. This will not just be a financial blow, it will be a public detonation. Are you prepared for the fallout? Victoria will not go quietly. She could hire a lawyer and drag you through a messy, painful, and very public court battle, claiming emotional distress or undue influence. This was the moment of truth. Was I ready? I thought of Victoria's smug, cruel face, of Marcus's mocking applause. I thought of James's letter, his trust in me. This wasn't a choice made in the heat of anger. It was a duty I had postponed for too long. I am not asking you to do anything illegal, Arthur. I am asking you to execute the legal framework that you and my husband meticulously designed for this very contingency. This is not about revenge. It is about accountability. For years, Victoria has been living in a house of cards built with my money and her father's legacy. I am simply removing my cards from the table. I pushed a separate, slimmer file across the desk, and these are the promissory notes she signed over the years for her first boutique, for the down payment on the house, for the catering and venue for her wedding to Marcus. Over $2 million, not including a decade of forgiven interest. I want you to issue a formal demand for immediate repayment. He looked at the signed documents, her flamboyant signature on each one, then back at me. I could see the internal struggle on his face, the duty of the lawyer versus the concern of the old family friend. She will be utterly ruined, he stated, not as a question, but as a simple, stark fact. No, I corrected him gently, but firmly. She will be given a chance to start over. For the very first time in her life, she will own her successes and her failures completely. That is a gift, Arthur, even if it comes in a very ugly, painful box. I saw the shift in his eyes then. The hesitation vanished, replaced by the cool, professional resolve I knew so well. He had seen my determination, he had understood my reasoning, and his loyalty to James's final wish had won out. He straightened his tie, a small, decisive gesture. I understand, Eleanor. I will begin by freezing the supplementary credit lines and issuing the demand for repayment this afternoon. We will then proceed with the liquidation of all assets held by the trust. I will handle everything through a series of shell corporations to ensure your name is kept out of the immediate fallout. It will be clean, it will be legal, and it will be absolute. As I stood to leave, he said one more thing, his voice low. For what it's worth, Eleanor, I think James would be immensely proud of your strength today. I walked out of his office not feeling triumphant, but feeling solid, grounded. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, I was the one holding the map. The game had begun. While I was setting my silent, heavy pieces on the chessboard, Victoria was living in a world of blissful, arrogant ignorance. I knew my daughter's mind like the back of my own hand. The incident at the party, in her carefully constructed narrative, would be framed as my oversensitivity, my dramatic reaction, my failure to appreciate her brutal honesty. In her version of events, she was the brave truth-teller, and I was the fragile relic who couldn't handle it. She would be feeling righteous, liberated, completely unaware of the chasm that had just opened up beneath her feet. Her entire world, her very sense of self, revolved around perception. The successful businesswoman, the power couple, the flawless, enviable life. But I knew the truth that lay beneath the glossy surface. That flawless life was a stage play, and the stage itself was beginning to rot from the inside out. Her boutique, V, was bleeding money, a fact she cleverly hid with creative accounting and infusions of cash from the trust, which she treated like a personal ATM. Her acquisition she was so proud of was a desperate, reckless gamble, a Hail Mary pass to cover mounting debts she assumed I would, as always, eventually and silently absorb.
In the days following the party, her desperation, hidden from the world, took on a new, sharper edge. I didn't have to imagine it. Sophia, bless her heart, had a network of friends that rivaled the CIA. One of her bridge partners, a lovely woman named Carol, was a senior loan officer at a major commercial bank. It was through this quiet, suburban grapevine that I heard what happened next. 2 days after the party, Victoria and Marcus walked into the bank for a meeting they had scheduled weeks ago. They were applying for a substantial, unsecured business loan. It was the money they desperately needed to keep the newly acquired company afloat, to pay the higher salaries they had promised to poach key staff, and, I suspected, to fund the lavish European business trip Marcus had been talking about for months as a reward for their hard work. They sat down with the loan officer, Carol, radiating a confidence that bordered on entitlement. Victoria, I was told, launched into her well-rehearsed speech about growth, potential, and market disruption. She presented her company as a rising star, a titan in the making. Carol listened patiently, nodding in all the right places, before opening a thick folder on her desk. "It's an impressive portfolio, Mrs. Henderson," she said, her tone professional but cool. "However, our underwriters have flagged a significant concern." "A concern?" Victoria's practiced smile tightened at the edges. "I can't imagine what that would be. Our numbers speak for themselves." "It's not about your numbers precisely. It's the structure of your assets," Carol explained, pointing to a line on a document. "The commercial property your business is registered to, your primary residence in the estate district, according to public records, they are not owned by you directly. They are held by a family trust. A significant portion of your company's initial capitalization also appears to have originated from the same trust." Marcus, who knew nothing of the trust's true nature, looked at Victoria in confusion. "A trust? Darling, what is she talking about? I thought your father left everything to you." Victoria's face, according to Carol, went pale beneath her expensive makeup. She had always thought of the trust as a legal technicality, a clever tax shelter James had set up. She never grasped the fundamental truth: she was not the owner, but merely a tenant in her own life. "It's just a family arrangement," Victoria stammered, trying to wave it away with a flick of her wrist. "It's for estate planning purposes. It's all mine, effectively." "I understand," Carol said smoothly, though her eyes were sharp. "But for the purposes of this loan, it means your personal assets are already fully leveraged. The trust is the primary lien holder on everything. In short, Mrs. Henderson, you have no collateral to offer this bank. I'm afraid we cannot approve the loan at this time." The rejection was a stunning public blow. It wasn't just about the money. It was a crack in the carefully constructed facade of her success. She had been exposed, not as a fraud, but as something almost worse in her eyes, a dependent. That evening, I could almost hear the argument echoing in their cavernous cold house. I could picture Marcus, his manufactured charm curdling into fear and raw accusation. And I could picture Victoria, her arrogance turning into frantic, defensive denial. This is where Marcus would have begun his most insidious work. He wouldn't just blame her, he would twist the narrative, skillfully positioning me as the villain who was actively sabotaging her. "You see, darling," I could hear his smooth, manipulative voice in my head, dripping with false sympathy. "This is what I've been telling you. Your mother, she's controlling you, holding you back even from beyond the grave of your father. This trust isn't a gift, it's a leash. She doesn't want you to be truly independent because then she'd have no power over you." He would feed her deepest insecurity, the one she never spoke of. Her crippling fear that she could never live up to the towering legacy of her brilliant father. He would frame my financial support not as love, but as a weapon of control. He would convince her that cutting me off wasn't just desirable, it was a necessary act of war for her own survival and integrity. He would make her believe that the cage was my creation,
never admitting that he was the one who had been helping her lock the door from the inside, eager to get his hands on the perceived riches within. And Victoria, blinded by pride and terrified of failure, would believe him. She would see me not as her mother, but as her jailer. That belief would be the fuel for her rage, and it would make the coming fall all the more brutal, all the more deserved. A week after the party, the first needle found its mark. It wasn't a sledgehammer blow, it was a precise, surgical pinprick delivered with the cold, impersonal elegance of legal correspondence. On a Tuesday morning, a professional courier delivered a slim, cream-colored envelope to Victoria's boutique. Inside was a letter from the esteemed law offices of Abernathy, Finch and Associates. It was a formal yet impeccably polite demand. It outlined in painstaking detail the series of personal loans, totaling $2,147,000, that I had extended to her over the past 15 years. Each loan was itemized with the date and its stated purpose, the seed money for her first failed art gallery, the substantial down payment on the house she now lived in, the extravagant cost of her destination wedding to Marcus, and a dozen other emergencies that had been forgotten as soon as they were solved. The letter kindly requested that she begin making monthly interest payments as per the terms of the signed promissory notes, copies of which were helpfully attached for her convenience. The first payment was due in 30 days. I didn't have to imagine the explosion. Victoria's call came less than an hour later. Her number flashed on my phone screen, and for a moment, my hand hovered, a lifetime of maternal instinct urging me to answer, to soothe, to fix, to make it all better. With a deep breath, I silenced the phone and let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, but my resolve unshaken. It wasn't a plea. It was a tirade, a torrent of furious, disjointed accusations, her voice thin and ragged with rage that bordered on hysteria. "How could you do this to me?" she shrieked, the sound distorted by the phone's small speaker. "After I specifically told you to stay out of my life, you sick your lawyer on me? This is harassment. You're trying to ruin me. Was publicly humiliating you at my party not enough? You had to find another way to get back at me? Those were gifts. You know they were gifts. You never said anything about paying them back." I deleted the message without a second thought. The words "thank you" had never once appeared in any of her numerous requests for money over the years, but the word gift was now suddenly a retroactive, indisputable fact in her mind. My reply was not a phone call. It was a single, typed email sent from a new, anonymous address I had created for this very purpose.
Subject: regarding your voicemail. Victoria, I am simply managing your father's estate, as is my fiduciary duty. The documents you signed are quite clear. They are legally binding loans, not gifts. As you are now the successful head of a growing and prosperous company, I trust that honoring these long-standing financial commitments will not present an issue. I wish you continued success in all your endeavors. Sincerely, Eleanor Wells. The email was a small masterpiece of passive aggression, crafted by Abernathy's himself. It was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. It simultaneously acknowledged her proclaimed success while calling her bluff on it. It offered no emotional opening, no crack in the facade, no room for argument or negotiation. It was a stone wall, and she had just run into it at full speed. Meanwhile, another quieter needle was being prepared on a different front. The journalist, Ben Carter, was a young, hungry reporter for an online financial journal, the kind that prided itself on deep-dive investigations. He had received the anonymous tip from Laura, the store manager Victoria had fired unceremoniously a few months back for the sin of questioning her extravagant expenses. The tip was simple and tantalizing. Look into the real funding of Victoria Henderson's company, V Acquisitions. The money isn't hers. Intrigued by the whiff of scandal, Ben started digging. He was a good reporter, meticulous, patient, and thorough. He started with public records, uncovering the existence of the Wells Family Trust and its ownership of Victoria's primary assets. It was unusual for a woman of her age and supposed success, but not unheard of. He needed more than just documents. He needed a human element. He made a call to Victoria's office, posing as a freelance writer doing a glowing profile piece on up-and-coming female entrepreneurs. He asked a few innocent-sounding questions about her career trajectory, her mentors, and her initial source of funding for her first business venture. "I was very fortunate," Victoria told him, her voice as smooth as silk over the phone, the practiced humility rolling off her tongue. "I was very fortunate. My father was a brilliant businessman, and he left me with a solid foundation and a wonderful college fund. But everything I've built since then, I've built myself, from the ground up." Ben thanked her profusely for her time. He now had her on the record. He had the public documents that contradicted her story. He had the tip from the disgruntled ex-employee. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a picture, and it was not the one Victoria was painting for the world. He didn't have the full story yet, but he had the scent of it. He was a bloodhound who had just been shown a fresh trail, and he would not stop until he found its source. Victoria, convinced she had handled a minor annoyance from a small-time journalist with her usual charm, hung up the phone and turned her fury back to the more immediate problem, me. She saw the lawyer's letter not as a consequence of her actions, but as a malicious attack. She saw the journalist's call as a nuisance, not a looming threat. She was so focused on the enemy she thought was in front of her that she never saw the one circling from the side, preparing to strike and bring her whole world crashing down. The next 2 weeks were a slow-motion study in escalating panic. The demand letter from Abernathy was the catalyst that started the chemical reaction. Victoria, a woman who had never had to balance a checkbook or live on a budget in her entire adult life, was suddenly faced with a multi-million-dollar debt that was legally, undeniably hers. Her initial white-hot rage gave way to a frantic, desperate search for a solution, any solution that didn't involve the ultimate humiliation of humbling herself to me. She and Marcus tried to refinance the house, hoping to pull out equity to cover their immediate shortfalls. They were summarily rejected. Every bank they approached, every mortgage broker they called, gave them the same cold, disheartening answer. The title was held by a trust, and without the trustee's signature, the property was an untouchable, unleverageable asset. The house she had considered her greatest symbol of success was in fact her largest liability, a gilded cage she couldn't borrow against. Her business was the next domino to wobble. The acquisition, which had been her crowning achievement just weeks before, was quickly becoming an albatross around her neck. The new company came with a higher payroll, significant overhead, and supply contracts that required immediate capital. The failed bank loan was for that very purpose. Now, without that infusion of cash, she was in serious trouble. Suppliers, hearing whispers of financial instability, started demanding payment up front. 2 key employees she had poached from a rival promised a significant salary increase and a promotion, threatened to quit when their new paychecks didn't materialize. The cracks in her paper empire were beginning to spiderweb across the entire facade. It was during this period of escalating chaos that Abernathy and I encountered our first and only potential obstacle. While reviewing the labyrinthine trust documents James had insisted upon for the 3rd time, Abernathy found it. A single obscure clause buried deep in the appendices. It stipulated that in the event of a total asset seizure by the trustee, the beneficiary could file a legal petition to delay the proceedings for a period of 30 days by claiming severe emotional and psychological distress. It was a concession James made at the last minute, Abernathy explained over the phone, a note of deep frustration in his voice. He was a brilliant man, but he had a soft spot.
He worried about leaving her completely destitute in a single moment of crisis. He called it a cooling off period. It's a long shot for her, Eleanor, but a clever, unscrupulous lawyer could use it to tie us up in court, generate negative press, and paint you as a vindictive, monstrous mother. 30 days. It was enough time for Victoria to rally her forces, to find a sympathetic narrative that could win over a judge or the public. It was enough time to potentially find a way to access other funds or hide assets. The clean, swift amputation we had planned was now at risk of becoming a messy, drawn-out, and very public battle. I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the beautiful garden James and I had planted together, the roses in full, glorious bloom. He had always been the strategist, the chess player who thought 5 moves ahead. What would he do in this situation? And then I knew, as if he had whispered it in my ear, he wouldn't wait for the opponent's move. He would change the very nature of the board. She can only claim distress from an asset seizure if she still has assets to be seized, I said slowly, the idea forming sharp and clear as I spoke. What if, by the time she finds out about the seizure, there's nothing for her to legally claim? Abernathy was silent for a moment. I could almost hear the legal gears turning in his brilliant head. You mean you want to preempt the seizure? Exactly. I said, a surge of adrenaline sharpening my senses. As trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the value of the trust's assets, correct? If I believe the current management of those assets, namely Victoria, is devaluing them through gross mismanagement and endangering the core capital, I have the right, even the obligation, to step in and sell them to preserve that capital.
You want me to sell the house, Abernathy stated, his voice flat. I want you to sell the house, the commercial property, all of it, I clarified. Not on the open market, to a holding company, one of our pre-existing shell corporations. We transfer the titles legally and quietly. By the time she realizes the game is over, the pieces will already be off the board. Her name will not be on a single title. She will have nothing to file a petition against. It was a bold, aggressive, and utterly ruthless move. It was also perfectly unimpeachably legal. Abernathy let out a low whistle. That's a checkmate, Eleanor. A ruthless, beautiful checkmate. It will take a few days to drop the paperwork and file it with the county. While he worked his legal magic, I began my own final preparations. Sophia came over, her presence a quiet, steadying comfort, as I sorted through a lifetime of memories. I packed only the essentials, clothes, a few cherished books, and the small box of James's letters. The rest, the heavy, expensive furniture, the art we had collected, the history embedded in the very walls, would be sold. It all belonged to a life I was leaving behind. Are you sure about this, Ellie? Sophia asked, her voice gentle, holding up a framed photo of a young, smiling Victoria on her first bicycle. I'm not sure if she will ever understand, Soph, I said, taking the photo from her and placing it gently in a box destined for long-term storage. But I am sure that I can't continue living like this. I am giving her the chance to become the woman her father always hoped she'd be, and more importantly, I am giving myself a chance to finally find peace. The day Abernathy was ready, I was also ready. My small, unassuming house on the coast of Maine, purchased under my new name, Elaine Wells, was waiting. The movers had already come and gone, taking only my few chosen boxes. The old house felt vast, empty, a hollow shell. The final call came at 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. It's done. Abernathy's voice was crisp and professional. The titles have been transferred and recorded. The bank accounts linked to the trust will be closed at 9 a.m. on Monday. The credit cards will be deactivated at the same time. Thank you, Arthur, for everything. I hung up the phone, took one last look around the home that had held all my joys and all my sorrows, and walked out the door without looking back. The silent chess game was over. The storm was about to break.
The storm broke not with a thunderous bang, but with the humiliatingly quiet final beep of a declined credit card. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. Victoria, in a desperate last-ditch attempt to maintain the illusion of control and success, had insisted on taking a major supplier out for an extravagant lunch at a Michelin-starred restaurant. It was a performance, a bold-faced reassurance that despite the rumors and delayed payments, her company was stable and prosperous. The bill came, a staggering $4,000 sum that was meant to impress. Victoria presented her platinum card with a confident, dismissive flourish. The waiter, a young man with nervous eyes, returned to the table a few minutes later, his expression deeply apologetic. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, but it's been declined." She laughed, a high, brittle sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's impossible. There must be a mistake. Try it again." He did. It was declined again. A dark, angry flush crept up her neck. She handed him another card from a different bank, her movements sharp and jerky. Declined. Marcus, flustered and sweating, offered his own card. Declined. The supplier looked on, his polite smile failing to hide a flicker of alarm and dawning comprehension. The performance had failed spectacularly. The queen had been revealed to have no clothes, and worse, no credit. They ended up paying in cash, scraping together the entire contents of their wallets in a final, mortifying indignity. The drive home was surely a silent, seething affair. The humiliation would have been curdling into pure, unadulterated rage, all of it directed at me, the architect of her downfall. She would have stormed into the house, phone in hand, ready to scream, ready to unleash another tirade of abuse and accusation. But she was met with a different kind of silence. The deep, unnerving, absolute silence of a powerless house. She flicked a light switch in the grand two-story foyer. Nothing happened. She tried another. Still nothing. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, fumbling with his own phone for a flashlight, his voice tight with irritation. "Did you forget to pay the electric bill or something?" The question, so mundane and yet deeply accusatory, must have stung like a slap. She, Victoria Henderson, CEO and business visionary, forget to pay a simple utility bill? The thought was absurd. They moved like ghosts through the dark, cavernous rooms. The internet was down. The water in the kitchen tap trickled for a moment, then stopped completely. Panic, cold and sharp and real, began to set in. This was not a simple outage. This was not a mistake. This was coordinated. This was an attack. It was then, and the gloom of the foyer, that Victoria would have finally noticed the mail, piled up on the marble floor by the mail slot, bills, junk mail, and two official-looking, stiff brown envelopes from the county registrar's office. Her hands would have been shaking as she tore them open under the weak beam of Marcus's phone. They were notices of title transfer. The first was for the house she was standing in. The second was for the commercial property where her now defunct boutique was located. The owner was no longer listed as the Wells Family Trust. Both properties had been sold 3 days prior to a sterile, unfamiliar entity, V Holdings LLC. This was the moment of pure, shattering incomprehension. How could her house be sold without her knowledge? It was impossible. It had to be a mistake, a monstrous bureaucratic error. She would have run to her office, to her heavy oak filing cabinet, desperate to find her own copies of the deeds, the documents that proved she was the owner, that this was all a terrible waking nightmare. And that's when she saw it. On the large, polished mahogany desk where she conducted her business, where she signed checks and made calls that changed lives, sat a single, small, polished wooden box. It was an old music box of hers, one I had given her for her 10th birthday, a box that she hadn't seen in decades. It hadn't sat on that desk an hour before. Her heart would have been hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was a message. This was the source of the attack. With trembling fingers, she would have lifted the lid. There was no sweet tinkling music. Instead, nestled on the faded red velvet lining, were 2 items: the old, tarnished brass key for her childhood bedroom, and a single folded sheet of my personal,
cream-colored stationery. She unfolded the paper. The note was not long. It was not angry. It was perhaps the most terrifying thing she had ever read, because it was calm, final, and absolute. Victoria. You once wrote in your childhood diary that your biggest dream was to build a kingdom of your own. Your father and I spent our lives giving you the foundation for that kingdom. At your party, you said you wanted me to leave your life. I have now left, and I have taken my foundation with me. Everything that remains is yours, the kingdom you built yourself. Good luck. Eleanor. He blamed her for being a fool, for not understanding her own finances. She blamed him for being a parasite, for pushing her to be more aggressive, more dismissive of me. He told her he had wasted the best years of his life waiting for an inheritance that never existed. She screamed that he had only ever loved her for a bank account that was never truly hers. It was a fittingly toxic and pathetic end to a partnership built on a foundation of lies and greed. He packed a single, expensive suitcase and left, disappearing from her life as completely and silently as I had. The divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences, arrived via courier a week later. Her business, of course, imploded. The article was a death sentence from which there was no recovery. Suppliers, now certain they would never be paid for past invoices, canceled all lines of credit and refused to ship new merchandise. Her remaining employees, facing a future with no salary and a tarnished reputation by association, walked out en masse. The boutique, V, with its expensive lease and no cash flow, shuttered its doors within a fortnight, a for lease sign appearing in its chic, minimalist window. The V acquisition sign was taken down from her office building, the space vacated, leaving behind nothing but a trail of broken contracts and angry creditors seeking legal action. Victoria, the celebrated CEO and society figure, was now unemployed, soon to be divorced and facing eviction from a house she no longer owned. She was forced to sell her designer clothes, her handbags, her jewelry, the very trappings of a life she had not earned, just to afford the security deposit on a small, bleak, one-bedroom apartment in a less than desirable part of town. The fall from grace was not just financial, it was absolute. For months, I heard nothing. I had made it clear through Abernathy that any and all communication was to go through his office. There were no more angry voicemails, no desperate emails, just a profound, unbroken, and, for me, peaceful silence. Then, nearly a year after that fateful night, she acted. But she didn't do what I expected. She didn't try to find me. She didn't send a desperate plea for money through a third party. She went to see Abernathy. He called me immediately after her visit. His voice was different, tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. Not pity, but perhaps a grudging respect. She came to my office today, Eleanor. My heart, which I thought had become immune to her, stuttered. What did she want? Money? That's the thing, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. She didn't ask for anything. Not a dime. No legal challenge, no threats. She just sat there, in the same chair you sat in almost a year ago, looking a decade older. She was thin, Eleanor, and her clothes were simple. He described the scene to me. She had sat quietly for a long time, looking at her own hands, which were no longer perfectly manicured. Finally, she had looked up at him, her eyes clear of the old arrogance, the brittle pride, and filled only with a deep, weary sadness. I don't want to fight, she had told him, her voice quiet but steady. I don't want anything. I just have one question, Mr. Abernathy, and I need you to be honest with me. What is it, Victoria? He had asked gently. Her voice had been barely a whisper, heavy with a year of solitude and reflection. My mother, is she okay? Abernathy, bound by my strict instructions, but moved by the profound change in her, chose his words with care. She has found her peace, Victoria. Victoria had nodded slowly, as if accepting a final, unchangeable verdict. And the money, my father's money, what happened to it? A significant portion of your father's estate has been used to endow the James Wells Memorial Scholarship, Abernathy informed her, his tone professional but not unkind. It's providing full college tuition for underprivileged students who show exceptional promise. Your mother directs the fund herself.
He told me she had absorbed this information without a word, her gaze distant. The money she had taken for granted, the inheritance she had seen as her birthright, was now changing the lives of strangers. The legacy she had squandered was now building futures for those who deserved the chance. She stood up, her movements no longer sharp and confident, but measured, almost humble. She had said, "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy." That's all I needed to know. And then she had turned and left his office. It wasn't a full-blown redemption. It wasn't a Hollywood ending where she saw the error of her ways and we had a tearful cinematic reunion. Life is seldom that neat or that simple. But it was something. It was a crack in the thick, impenetrable wall of her pride. It was the first hesitant step out of the ruins of her own making, not to reclaim her old kingdom, but simply to ask if the person she had banished was okay. It was a single, fragile green shoot, pushing its way through a desolate landscape of rubble, and for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of the one thing I thought I had lost for good, a sliver of hope for the daughter I once knew. My new life is quiet, and that quiet is the most beautiful, healing sound I have ever known. I live in a small, weathered cottage on the coast of Maine, a few hundred yards from the raw, powerful beauty of the Atlantic Ocean. My name here is Elaine Wells. No one knows me as the widow of a successful businessman or the mother of a disgraced CEO. They know me as Elaine, the lady with the impressive rose garden that survives the salty air, the one who volunteers at the local library on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the one who makes a surprisingly good blueberry pie for the annual town bake sale. My mornings begin not with the familiar, low-grade anxiety of a potential phone call, but with the gentle, eternal rhythm of the tides. I walk along the beach as the sun rises, the cool, salty air a balm to a soul that was suffocated for too long in a life that was not my own. I watch the sandpipers skitter along the water's edge, their tiny legs a blur of motion, and I feel a sense of peace so profound it feels like a physical presence, a warm blanket around my shoulders. My life is smaller now, in terms of square footage and social obligations, but it is infinitely larger in spirit. My purpose is no longer tied to the volatile, unpredictable happiness of one person. It is now tied to many. I spend my afternoons in a small home office overlooking the sea, managing the James Wells Memorial Scholarship Fund. I read the applications from bright, ambitious, wonderful young people who have faced incredible hardship with a grace and resilience that takes my breath away. I read their essays filled with dreams of becoming doctors, engineers, social workers, and teachers. Their gratitude, expressed in heartfelt, sometimes grammatically imperfect letters, is not a performance. It's a raw, powerful, humbling force.
Last week, I received the first graduation announcement. It was from a young woman named Maria. She was the first in her family to even think about going to college, let alone graduate from it. The scholarship had been her only way. She had graduated from the University of Maine with top honors in nursing and was going to work at a community health clinic in her underserved neighborhood, a place desperately in need of her skills and her compassion. I will never be able to fully express what this opportunity has meant to me, Mrs. Wells, she wrote in a long, heartfelt letter that I have read a dozen times. You and your late husband didn't just give me an education. You gave my entire family a future. You gave my younger siblings a role model. I promise to honor the legacy of James Wells by paying it forward every single day of my life. I sat on my small wooden porch reading her letter as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had made the right choice. My husband's legacy, our legacy,
was not in a trendy fashion boutique or a luxury car or a cold, modern house. It was here, in the life of this brilliant, compassionate young nurse. It was in the futures of all the students who would follow her. It was being used not to enable entitlement, but to empower potential. I thought of James's letter, the one that had given me the strength to act. Love is not a blank check for a life without consequence. He was so right. True love, I've learned, is not about endless, unconditional giving. It's about having the strength to set boundaries. It's about honoring the other person enough to let them face the truth of who they are, even if that truth is painful. My love for Victoria had become a cage for both of us. By walking away, I had finally set us both free. I don't know what the future holds for Victoria. Abernathy told me she found a simple job, an administrative position in a small company. She is living within her means. She is paying her own rent. Perhaps one day she will find her own version of peace. Perhaps not. Her story is now her own to write, and I am no longer holding the pen. My role in her life, the one of mother, banker, and safety net, is over. But mine, I feel, is just beginning. At 71, I have found a new purpose. I have reclaimed my dignity, my peace, and my name. I am not just a mother, a widow, or a trustee. I am Elaine, and my future is as open and vast and full of possibility as the ocean view from my window. Sometimes the door that closes behind you is not an ending. It is a portal. It is the entrance to a new room, a new life, a place where you can finally, truly breathe. I had to close that door on my own daughter to find myself again. I wonder, has anyone listening ever had to close a door like that, just to save yourself? Let me know in the comments. Your stories, I believe, are as important as mine. Thank you for letting me share this piece of my heart with you tonight.